Bye. by the consistency of Sri Vishwambar Mishra, Gauranga Mahaprabhu. Now we remember Vrindavan Dham. Anupama Madhuri Jori. Vrindavan mein Lal ki jai, vaisne wali ki jai, jai jai Sri Radhe. Hare
Hare
Sachiputram atra surupam rupam dastakata muikurim maturim hoshvadi radha kundam girivaram Pratita Kripaya Sri Guru Damnatos Purave Gaura Chandraya Radhikaya Tadaya Krishnaya Krishna Bhaktaya Tad Bhaktaya Namo Anandalila Maya Vigrahaya Hemavadivyansari Sundaraya Tasmai Mahapremana Sampradaya Chaitanya Chandraya Namo Namaste Chaitanya Chandraya Namo Namaste Chaitanya Chandraya Namo Namaste Bhaktya Vihimaya Aparada Yachay Chitastakama Shikara Swarha Sumrali Manara Radhikara Sakumama Kripani Suryachana King Kurim Guru Tavai Vasmi Najivami Tayavana Jivikyaya Devi Tam Namaham First of all, I offer my sustained Dandavat Puspanjali, my heart like flowers thousands and thousands of times at the lotus feet of my holy master, my supremely worshipable spiritual Gurudev. Asmatiya Parvaradatam Guru Parapadma Nitya Leela Pravishta Om Vishnupad Ashtotara Satasri Rupanuracharya Varya Sila Bhakti Vedanta Narayana Goswami. Secondly, I offer my pranam thousands of times at the lotus feet of my Param Gurudev and to all of our Sri Rupanuga Gaudiya Guru Parampara. And finally, I offer my pranam to Anandya Chitandika Bhagavan and to all the Vaishnavas and Vaishnavis. Vanchakalpatarupascha Kripa Sindhu Devata Uditanam Pavane So yesterday we were discussing about the self, ATMA. And how the conditioned souls in this world, their first defect is Brahm, the tendency to be illusioned. And two illusions are prominent. One related to misidentifying the actual self with the conventional material ego. That is the first. And the second aspect of Brahm is the illusion, bewilderment in regard to the world. So the Atma is Ketragya, the knower of the field. He's first confused about who am I. And then he's confused about what the field is. What is his world of experience. So today we'll continue this. We'll go on to the next one, but we'll just continue to discuss a little about the nature of Atma. So Jamatri Rishi has said, Tata Gyatritva Khatritva Bhoktritra Nija Dharmaka Paramatmaika Sheshatva Subhava Savada Swata. So the first quality of the Jiva is Gyatritva. He is a knower. He has awareness. He's not just awareness, Jnana Matra. If it were only awareness, then he could not have so many other qualities, such as being an agent, Katritva, the doer, Bhoktritva, the enjoyer. And especially yesterday we discussed how the soul is Premaspada. Who remembers what does Premaspada mean? He is the seat of love. Whatever love we have for anything, it is not because of that thing. It is because of Atma. And why is the Atma the Premaspad? Because Paramatma, actually. So the natural object of love for everyone is not your car, not your shoes, not your family members even, not even your body. To a certain degree, yourself. But the cause of all affection is that the self, within the self, there is the Paramatma, the Supreme Self. So Sri Krishna illustrated that in his very beautiful Leela, when Brahmaji tried to steal the calves and boys, cowherd boys. Then Sri Krishna expanded himself, became all the boys and all the calves. And almost 1 year later, after Krishna had been playing in this way, incognito, not recognized by anyone, even Balaram. Then one day, Krishna and his cowherd boy friends and calves, otherwise known as Krishna, they were wandering in the valley of Govardhan. It's all Krishna. On the top of the hill, the cowherd men were there with their cows. But when the cows saw the calves at the bottom, even though those calves had grown and they had given birth to new calves, and the cows are supposed to be attached to the new calves, but instead they showed more attachment to the older calves. And the cowherd men tried to control them with their sticks, but they could not. And the cows came running down the hill and gave the milk to their calves. So the men, they were angry that the boys had come and brought the whole herd down the hill, and now the milk was being drunk by the older calves. And the cowherd men came running down the hill also to rebuke their sons. But when they got down and they saw their sons, they forgot about everything. And they just embraced them with tears in their eyes. And they were sniffing their heads and they were in ecstasy. Balaram was watching all this. And Balaram thought, what is this? how is it that the cows have more love for the older calves who have grown than for the newly born ones? This is not ordinary. And how is it that they are so, the cowherd men are showing love for their sons like they show love for Krishna? Because already they love Krishna more than their own sons in Braja. Everyone loves Krishna more than anyone else. How is it possible? Then Balaram, by the wish of Sri Krishna, Yoga Maya, which had covered Balaram's knowledge, uncovered him, and then he realized, oh, Kanaya, all these boys and all these calves, they're all you. So by this pastime, actually Shukadeva Goswami at that point he says, Tasmat Priyatama Swatma Sarvesham Apidehinam Tadartam Eva Sakalam Jagat Etach Characharam. The meaning is, it is only for the satisfaction of the self that a person is living. And his true object of love, to which he is really attached, is the self of the self, the Lord within the heart. So yesterday we discussed the subject of TATTVA, how the soul is a knower. He is Swasmai Swayam Prakash. Quick test. What does it mean? Swasmai Swayam Prakash. Raise your hand. Yes.
It means that he's able to illuminate himself. He has self-awareness. I mean, he's able to illuminate around, but he also has self-awareness.
Which part is which? What does Swayam Prakash mean?
Swayam, that he illuminates around.
Swayam Prakash means he's self-luminous, like a candle. So the candle illuminates himself to others and illuminates other things to others. So that is Swayam Prakash. But Swasmai Swayam Prakash, Swasmai means unto himself. He also is aware, a candle is not aware of himself, all the things that the candle is illuminating. So the soul is aware of himself and also aware of the things he illuminates. So yesterday, so that is called Swasmai Swayam Prakash. So when we say that the jiva is Gyatritva, the knower, then the word Gyan has three meanings. Who remembers the three meanings of Gyan? I can see you all deeply contemplated the class yesterday. Okay. This is why, after hearing a class, then you should go and then try. It's like, a chipmunk, his mouth is full, but he didn't swallow anything. So you have to go and digest it. If you just go outside in the garden, have a pizza, laughing and joking, everything will just evaporate. Okay? That person is not a serious student. Srotriyam, hearing, means hearing and taking it into your heart. Not in one ear and out from the other. So, who remembers? Want to have a go?
One is
so the first meaning of Gyan is only awareness. That is subjective awareness with no content. No content. Then the second meaning is that knowledge, the actual content which is revealed to a knowing person. Let's say if you see a tree, now you have knowledge of the tree. So that knowledge of the external object is being revealed to a subject. So the first one is only the subject's awareness of himself with no content and no object. Just awareness. Mayavadis take this to be the only meaning of jnana. Then the second one, that is the knowledge which is the content of knowledge which is revealed to a knower. So that is the objective knowledge, that content which is revealed to a knower. Then the third one is the substrate of consciousness. The soul is said to be knowledge. That means he is a substance which is conscious and which has the attribute of knowledge, consciousness. For example, sugar is a substance and it has the attribute of being sweet. So the Atma is a substance. What is he? Gyan. Here Gyan means his consciousness. But he also has the attribute of consciousness. That is a quality that his Gyan Vritti can spread out from him and transform into the various content of the things that he knows. Think about it carefully. It's not so difficult. Just think about it carefully. The Atma, Krishna said in Bhagavad Gita, is immutable. Right? It's unchanging. Right? So if you are unchanging and you are conscious, then how can you be conscious of different things? Like now it was morning, then it was noon, then it's afternoon. So your consciousness is changing because the consciousness has to transform in order to accommodate the movement of its contents. Right? Understand? Just like a magnet has a power that extends beyond itself and can move iron filings. So the jiva is jnana, that means his substance, the substance from which he is composed is jnana. That's the substrate. And he has the quality, the characteristic of jnana, that is jnana vritti, that his consciousness can extend beyond himself and can transform to accommodate different kinds of content and relay that to the soul. Understand? So, just pure awareness, that's the first meaning. The second meaning is the content which is revealed to the soul. So the first one is the subject. The second one is knowledge in the form of objective knowledge. And the third one is the substance, the soul himself, who is the substrate for the subject for the quality of knowledge, for that characteristic of knowledge. Okay, is it clear? You understand? So the soul is immutable. Yeah? It doesn't change. So if the soul is consciousness, in order to perceive other things changing, there's something about you which will have to change. Understand? So, that is why we quoted the verse of the Srimad Bhagavatam yesterday, in the 11th canto. It is said, Upalabdhi matram savanabit. Even though the jiva is made of consciousness and he's unchanging, but he experiences the movements of time. That means he himself as consciousness is personally unchanging, but his jnana vritti extends and this transforms in order to transmit back to him what's going on around him. Okay? No, soul is not changing. No. Yes. Question?
Well, actually, the analogy of sugar, so what is the third level of sugar awareness?
Well, the analogy does not extend fully because the sugar has no consciousness. This can only be applied to the subject of consciousness. The analogy of the sugar, or the analogy of the sugar was to show there's a difference between a substrate and its attribute. Right? The substrate of sweetness is the sugar, and its attribute is sweetness. So similarly, the third meaning of Gyan is the substrate. The soul is consciousness as a substrate. And it also has the attribute of consciousness which can extend from itself and transform to relay the objects to the subject. Because the objects are changing. The subject is not changing, right? But the objects are changing. So this is important to understand because the soul is unchanging. But its attribute, Jnana in the form of its attribute, consciousness, Jnana vritti, extends from the soul into the chitta. And there in the chitta, there is a darkened portion of chitta which is filled with many, many samskaras, impressions. It is a tamasic portion of the chitta filled with impressions. And what is that? Ahankara, ego. So, swapsam aham, avasam sukham aham aswapsam, nakinchita vedisam. When you are asleep, then the ego is dissolved. But when you wake up, then the ego is activated again. So in the waking state, the soul, which has ahankar, its own I-ness, its jnana vritti extends onto the I-ness of the material ego. And now he is identifying with that. He's identifying with that. Why? Because that material ego facilitates his bhog, enjoyment of material existence. So we are actively identifying with the material ego. And this is an offense to the holy name. Ahammamadi parmo namni sopyaparada krit. Once by hearing from Sri Guru about the glory of the holy name and all the tattvas, jiva tattva, maya tattva, all these things. If a person will maintain his self-identity within the external ego, now he's making an offense to the holy name. You have to stop that. It's offense to the holy name. Why are we chanting and spacing out and being inattentive? Because we kept our identity in the conventional material ego. And it is so many samskaras, and from that all desires and thoughts are coming. So if one is chanting the holy name, but remaining in that state of identification with the material ego, this is the 10th offense to the holy name. So, then Naam will not manifest this beautiful form and qualities and pastimes. So yesterday we discussed Gyatritva. Now, we're coming to the next aspect of the jiva. Kartritva. He is an agent, a doer. That means he is the initiator of activities. Now in Bhagavad Gita, perhaps you know, where Krishna said, Prakrite kriyamanani gunaye karmani sarvasaha hankara vimodatma kartahamiti manyate. The spirit soul, bewildered by the influence of ahankar, false ego, he thinks himself the karta, the doer of activities which are actually carried out by the three gunas, the qualities of prakriti, the material energy. Now one may say, well, here Krishna said that the jiva is not the doer. But you are saying, or rather Jamatri Rishi is saying, Kartritva, the jiva is the doer. So what is the answer? Is the jiva the doer or not the doer? Now generally our acharyas, because we are following the Vedanta Sutra of Vyasadeva, and Srimad Bhagavatam is the explanation of Vedanta Sutra. And in Vedanta Sutra is 4 chapters, and in the second chapter there is a comparison between Vedanta and the Saddarshans, the 6 classical systems of Vedic philosophy. There's also a comparison with the materialism of Charvak Muni, and also Jainism, and also 4 types of Buddhism. But essentially, in the second chapter, the conclusions of Vedanta are established by comparing and contrasting them with all these other alternatives. Understand? So now, in Sankhya Darshan, they say that yes, the jiva, the soul, is conscious and he's an individual and there are multiplicity of jivas. But the jiva is not the doer. Only when he's in contact with Prakriti, the material energy, now Prakriti is doing everything. But the jiva is not karta. And this is why Jamati Rishi say no, kartrita. The jiva is an agent. Now, a person who follows Sankhya philosophy could say, this verse of Bhagavad Gita, ahankara vimudatva, kartalam iti manyate. If someone thinks he is a doer, then vimudatma, he is bewildered by ahankar, by false ego. Someone may say this. So in reply, we say no. Actually, this verse does not say that the jiva does not have kartrita, agency. That's not what the verse says. It says that he thinks that he is the agent of the activities which are done by Prakriti. There's a difference. Is it clear? First of all, katam iti manyate. The soul thinks. That's also an activity. So the verse itself says that the Atma has kartrita, agency, is doer. Because he's considering. Manyate, he's considering, he's thinking. I am the doer. So that's why I was saying, when you identify with the ego, that's an activity. And you're doing it here. Kartanamiti manyate. But instead of thinking, I am the Atma, who can act through desiring, he thinks, I am doing the activities which are performed by the physical body and senses. Like that. So this verse does not say that the Atma is not the doer. It says he's not the doer of the activities that Prakriti is doing, the material energy. Is it clear? So, yes. He's the doer of placing his self-identity in the material ego. He's doing that. Kartayam iti manyate. He's thinking, he's considering. Oh, I am that thing which is actually not him. But now he's identifying with that, now Prakriti is doing everything. Now, in Vedanta Sutra 2.3.31, 2.3.31 Vedanta Sutra, it is said, Karta Shastra Tvat, means the jiva is a karta, he is a doer. Why? Because of Shastra Artha, the meaning of the scripture. So this means that the scripture would have no meaning if the jiva were not the karta, the doer. Because the material energy, Prakriti, is dead. It is jad. It is inert. So if the scripture were talking to the physical energy, saying, don't do this, don't do that, then what's the point? And if the scripture is saying to the soul, don't do this, but the soul is not the doer, then what's the point? You understand? Scripture says, Dharmachara, perform your duties. Satyavada, Satyam vada, speak the truth. But if the soul, which is consciousness, is not the doer, then to whom is the scriptures giving the instruction to do things? And if the doership is only with the material energy is dead, it has no consciousness. So why is Veda talking to him? Also, in the Shastra, it will say things like, let the person who desires to enjoy heaven perform sacrifice. So if the person it's telling to perform the sacrifice were not the same person who would enjoy the fruit of that sacrifice, then the Vedas would have no meaning. So in all of these ways, it is the Vedanta Sutra is saying, Karta Shastrata, the jiva is karta, he is an agent. Otherwise, the instructions of the scriptures would have no meaning. So, now, the question is, if the jiva is karta, does he have free will to act? This is a very big problem that people face. They think that, oh, the world is full of suffering, so there cannot be a God, because if there's a God, then he should be good. And the world is full of suffering. So if there is a God, then he's allowing all this suffering to happen. So he cannot be good. Why would God just make everyone suffering in this world? So I don't believe in God, because there cannot be a conscious, loving, kind, supreme, all-powerful person that is irreconcilable with a world full of people suffering. So then people tend to say, oh, there's no God. Otherwise, if they accept there is a God, then it's very difficult for them to reconcile this phenomena of innocent suffering. That innocent people are suffering. Very hard for them to reconcile. So then, certain religions come forward with a solution. And they say, well, it's not God's fault that people are suffering. People are suffering because it's their own karma. So there's no such thing as innocent suffering. Because if anyone is suffering, then it's because they have done something themselves and it has come back to them. So don't make God responsible for your suffering. The individual is responsible for his suffering because of karma. Then the person gets into another conundrum. Wait a minute, if everything is just going on according to our karma, then everything is predetermined. There's predestination. It's fatalistic. There's no free will. We're just stuck in this endless chain of karma. So I'm giving some examples of when an ordinary person tries to understand life. At every step, they just find themselves in another conundrum, another puzzle that they cannot solve by themselves. The mire is very dangling web. So, we have to solve this puzzle. So the scripture tells us, gives answer to the question, do we have free will, independence or not? And the answer is, yes and no. It's a little bit nuanced, let us say. The material energy is under the control of the Supreme Lord. Nothing can move without His permission. And the spiritual energy is also under the control of the Supreme Lord, for serving Him according to His will. And the Jiva, Tatastha Shakti, can be under one energy or another. So wherever he is, he's always under the will of the Lord. But his will is which energy he'll be under. You see? So the Jiva has a choice. He has will, but it is not... he has his own free will, but it cannot be always fully expressed in the conditioned state. So we'll elaborate on that more. So first of all, the spiritual energy is acting according to the will of the Lord. The material energy is also acting according to the will of the Lord. And the Jiva has within him the free will to decide, should I go this way, in Maya, or this way, in the shelter of Krishna's lotus feet. Now, let's consider the situation of the Jiva who is in this material world. He also has some free will, but it's conditioned. It's very conditioned. According to the degree to which he's in ignorance, then to that degree he will be fully controlled by the gunas or he'll have some choice to raise the standard of his life and consciousness towards Sattva. So, in Bhagavad Gita chapter 18, text 14, Sri Krishna describes 5 factors of action. Adhisthanam tathakata karnam cha pratagvidam vividas cha pratakchasta daivam chaivatra panchamam. Sri Krishna explains here, for a karma, an activity to take place, 5 things are involved. Adhisthanam means the body, your body. If the soul doesn't have a body, it cannot act. Either he should have a material body, and through that body he can act, or he should have a spiritual body, and through the spiritual body he can act. So, if the soul, hypothetically, were to have no body, then his qualities of kartritva and bhoktritva, being the doer and the enjoyer, they would only be potentially in him. There would be a potential. And when he has a material body, he can manifest his doership and his enjoyership. Or if he has a spiritual body, he can manifest his doership or enjoyership. As far as Jnatattva is concerned, without a body, if the jiva is in Brahman, then he can only experience subjective awareness with no content, the first meaning of jnana. But to experience the other 2, then he will need either a material body or a spiritual body. So the first thing is adhisthanam. The first factor of action is adhisthanam, that means the place, and in this context it means having a physical body. Then tatha karta. The next factor of action is karta. Now karta generally means the doer, but in this context it means the ahankar, the material ego, which has been invested with kartrita, with doership and consciousness from the soul. Without the presence of the soul, even the ego will not do anything. So the soul has his spiritual ego, he has invested that into the material ego. And so here the word karta means the material ego, which is invested with consciousness and doership by the Atma. That is karta. Then the next cause, the third cause, karanam. Karanam means the senses. In order to act, you need senses. So that includes also the mind. Mana shastrani indriyani praktistani karshati. In Bhagavad Gita, Krishna said, Mamaivang so jiva loke jiva bhuta sanatana manha shastrani indriyani prakriti stani karshati. It's very deep. First, Krishna said, the jiva is my eternal separated part, amsa, vivinamsa. Then in the second part, he says, and he is prakriti karshati, being situated in the mature energy prakriti, karshati, he draws towards himself mana shastrani indriyani, the 6 senses. That means the mind plus the power of hearing, touching, seeing, tasting, and smelling. These 5. So here also Krishna is saying the jiva is the doer. Why? Karshati. This is the active verb. The jiva is drawing towards himself like a magnet draws iron filings towards himself. So the jiva by his will is karshati, drawing towards himself the mind and senses. And then through those is acting in the world. So, karanam, pratakvidam. The pratakvidam means different types. So the different types of senses. Then, vividas cha pratak cheshta. The fourth factor of action is pratakchasta, different endeavors. Here it literally means pran. Pran. Without pran you cannot move. Because pran is the original appearance of Kriya Shakti in the material energy. First there is chitta, and then when the rajas appears, then the chitta begins to condense and becomes the Sutta Tattva. And that is the chief pran, Mukhya pran. Then this pran moves everything. And it divides, pratak, just a pratak, different. It becomes pran, apan, viyan, saman, udan, 5 types of pran. And begins to move through the chitta and around the whole chakra system. Through the 72,000 nadis, channels in the body. So, that is the 4th factor of action, the pran. Without pran, there's no kriya, no activity. So then, the 5th one, Daivam Chaivatra Panchamam. And the 5th one here is Daivam. That means Paramatma. Paramatma. Here Daiva means Paramatma, the Super Soul. So, when these 5 factors are present, then an action can take place. Without them, you cannot act. So it's important to understand that the last one is Paramatma. He permits everything. In chapter 13, verse 23 of Bhagavad Gita. 13:23. Upadrasta, upamanta cha, bharta, bhokta, maheshwara, paramatmeti chaktukto, deismin purushapara. After describing about the soul, Krishna said, Dehismin Purushapara. There's another Purush in this body. Dehismin Purushapara. There's not only one Purush, the soul, but there's another Purush who lives in this body. Who is that? Paramatmeti Chaptukto. He is called Paramatma. And what is the role of that Paramatma? Upadrasta. Means he is Shakshi, watching. He's watching, but he's not getting involved. Paramatma is just watching. But he's also Upamanta, Anumanta, sorry. Upadrasta, Anumanta. That means he's permitting. If Paramatma will not permit something to take place, it cannot take place. Because he is the Vastu. He is the substrate of all existence. He is the actual reality. Dharma Pradita Kaitavotra Paramone Matsaranam Satam Vedyam Vastava Matra Vastu Shivadam Tapa Trayonmulanam. In the beginning of Bhagavatam, Srila Vyasadeva said, this Srimad Bhagavatam reveals that which should be known. The Vastava Vastu, the Vastava factual Vastu substance. The factual substance of reality everywhere. Only Paramatma. And knowing that, Shivadam Tapa Trayon Mulanam, to know, to see Paramatma everywhere, this is very auspicious. Because it uproots Tapatrai, all the threefold miseries of material existence. Until one knows, until one sees the Supreme Lord everywhere, he must undergo threefold miseries. So Vedyam Vastavam Attavastu Shivadam Tapa Trayonmula. There's only one way to uproot the miseries of material existence, and that is to know the Vastu, the true substance of reality. Paramatma. So, these are the 5 factors of action. So we have this situation where, let's look at different situations. The conditioned living entity who is completely in ignorance, he potentially has some free will, but it's not manifest. Because he does not know the alternative to sense gratification. Right? He's completely in ignorance, he's just thinking, what can I eat? Eating, sleeping, mating and defending. He cannot understand anything. Someone in the mode of passion also is very passionate, but they may meet a sadhu. Even someone in the mode of ignorance can. They also, no one's fully in ignorance. There has to be some rajas there just to be able to get out of bed, to move. So, if someone meets a sadhu, and the sadhu said, you are a soul and you are the servant of God. Now, he has an option. What do I do? Serve myself? Or try to serve God? But when he's very, very conditioned, it's difficult to serve God. Because all the senses are saying, don't do that devotional service. Engage, do karmas in this world. The mind is buzzing, buzzing, buzzing. I want to do an activity that will get something for myself. Reward-seeking activity. This is the mode of passion. I will only act to get something for myself. What is this devotional service? I went to the temple, I cleaned the floor. I cut the vegetables. I washed the pots. And at the end, I had nothing to show for it. Because bhakti is a oitaki. It is performed without a cause. It is not done for a purpose other than to please Krishna. So the rajasic mind, which is always reward-seeking, does not want to do bhakti. Because the rajasic mind will not do anything unless there's something in it for his conventional empirical self, which is not himself. Really, it's just the material ego. So in bhakti, then what do you get from this? So one who is very rajasic will not engage in devotional service. They will seek every excuse to avoid devotional service. Even if they put on tilak and kantimala and have a japamala and sit Hare Krishna Hare, but in his mind he's thinking about worldly activities. Because he just cannot think. I should do this, chant the holy name to please Krishna. That's all. But if he hears and has association, now he has a choice. But it's difficult. Rajas makes things difficult. So the degree to which Rajas, that is the avidya-vritti of Maya, goes away, the degree to which Rajas is going away, and the degree to which Sattva comes, that is the vidya-vritti of Maya, then to that degree, the person will have more freedom to make better choices. At least the sattvic person, his senses are not disturbing him to the point where he's feeling a strong pull away from devotional service. So by practicing bhakti, one goes up. Tadarajastumo bhavat kamalabhadayaste cheta eta anavidam stitam sattve prasiddhati. Practicing bhakti, gradually tamas goes away, rajas goes away, lust and anger and greed, they gradually go away. One becomes in sattva gun, and then in the sattvic chitta, he begins to realize the Vishuddha Sattva Swarup. There's a reflection of Krishna's Vishuddha Sattva Swarup in his sattvic chitta. And so now he can express his independence. Now, so we have discussed the various nuances of Gyatritva. We have just discussed the various nuances of Kartritva, agency. Now we come to the subject of Bhoktritva. That the jiva is an enjoyer. Bhagavad Gita 13:21. Bhagavad Gita 13:21. There Krishna said, Karya karna kartritve hetu prakriti uchate purusha sukha dukkanam bhaktitve hetu uchate. Here, bhaktitva in Bhagavad Gita. So the meaning is this. Prakriti. Hetu prakriti uchate. Prakriti is called the cause of karya, that means in this context the physical body, karana, the senses, kartritve, Here means the material ego, which initiates the worldly activities. So Prakriti is the cause of the body, the senses, and the material ego, which is with the sense of I invested in it by the soul, is now initiating worldly activities according to karma. Okay? But Purusha Sukha Dukkanam Bhaktitve Hetu Uchate. But the Purush is the cause, Hetu, of Bhaktitva, enjoyment. Of what? The experience, Bhaktitva, the experience of Sukh and Dukh, happiness and distress. Now, deliberate on this very deeply. We discussed yesterday, one of the qualities of the Atma is Chidanandatmaka. He is joyful. That means Dukkha Pratiyogita, there's no misery at all in the soul. And just an experience of the soul for a moment. We have a little glimpse of it in deep sleep, so we become refreshed. And we gave other examples also yesterday. So, happiness and distress is not in the Atma. Because the material happiness is always mixed. There's always some distress in with the material happiness. And in the suffering, it's mainly suffering. So there's Sukh and Dukh, but it's all mixed together in this world. This happiness and distress is actually not in the jiva. It's in the mind. If you're feeling any distress or anything, it's not you. Understand? So you can look and think, oh, everyone is suffering, everyone is suffering. But actually, no suffering is there in the Atmas. It's only in the mind. There's no suffering in the Atmas. But because the Atma, by his Gyan Vritti, is investing his sense of I into the subtle body, and the subtle body is expanding and contracting. So he's thinking that I am suffering and enjoying. Actually not. The Atma is immutable, and it is does not experience, it is not the location of the Sukh and Dukh. The word Ka means Akash, space, and Su means beautiful or good. Good space, that means that the Chitta is expanding. Sukha, the Chitta has expanded in space. You can tell. When you feel happy, then it's as if your mind has expanded. There's a ullas, there's an expansion of your consciousness. And when you're suffering, it's like the mind is contracted. So dukkha means negative or bad. So dukkha, the mind the chitta has contracted in space. So happiness and distress is nothing, except for the chitta expanding and contracting. That's all. This is the illusion of the material world. Everyone's looking for happiness and trying to avoid distress. But they have nothing to do with this. It's only the chitta expanding and contracting. So sukha, good space, dukkha, bad space. But the Purusha is the cause of him enjoying and suffering. Why? Because he's the cause. By his will, he has invested his sense of I in the subtle body, in the ahankara. And therefore, Krishna is saying here, the soul is the cause of bhaktatva, tasting, experiencing, enjoying the sukh and dukh of this world. So in conclusion, Gyatitva, Kartritva, Bhaktitva nija dharmaka, the soul has these three qualities of knowership, doership and enjoyership. After hearing this Tattva Gyan from the lips of Sri Guru, then one should not be involved in happiness and distress, mood swings. Not my best day today. One should not be involved in complaining, blaming other people, criticizing, being miserable. No more problems at all. This is the purpose of hearing Tattva Gyan. That one will become free from all problems. Atma is already free from all problems, but only due to ignorance. And then what happens? Only talking all the time. This problem, that problem, this problem, that problem. So this is the sign of one who has heard. Remember we began the class yesterday. Arjun said, Stita dikem prabhaseta. How does one whose consciousness is fixed, who is in samadhi, how does he speak? And Krishna said, Yaha savatanu vishnehas tattat prapya shubha shubham nabhinandati nadvaisti tasya pragya pratisthita. How does he speak? In this life, there are always upheavals. And whether the person gets something good or something bad, they don't blame, they don't criticize, and they don't also praise the worldly situations. So this was Krishna's answer. How does the person who is stita deep, how does he speak? So by these words, this is a barometer by which we can measure in our own life. Have I heard the message of the Vedas, from the lotus lips of Sri Guru, or not? So one who has heard Srotriyam will become Brahmanishta. That's fixed in devotional service to Sri Krishna. So, from today, no more problems. If you come to me with any problem, did you not listen? Now, let's touch on the next two lines of this.
Yeah, we can move the...
Paramatmaika Sheshatva Subhava Sarvada Sota. The Jiva is Subhava Sarvada, always situated in his own nature. And who is he? He is Paramatmaika Sheshatva. He is the Parikar. He is the associate of Paramatma. Just like Krishna in Vrindavan has his parikars, his associates there. Narayan in Vaikuntha has his associates there. So in the Shrishti Leela, the creation pastime, which is done by the Paramatma, guess who his associates are? It's you. Yes. The Jivas are the associates of Paramatma in the Leela called Shrishti Leela. Creation pastime. So also in Bhakti Sandarbha in the beginning, Srila Jiva Goswami said, Paramatma Vaibhava, the Jiva is the Vaibhav. That means he's the manifestation of the glory of Paramatma. So that's who we are. So Paramatmaika Sheshatva, we are the parikars of Paramatma. Well, that has many implications. For example, the Paramatma, Kirdakishai Vishnu, is he in Goloka Vrindavan? So being as you are his associate in his lila, Have you ever been in Goloka Vrindavan? No. No. Some persons think that the jiva has fallen from the spiritual world. But directly in Shastra here, it is said, Paramatmaika Sheshatva, that the jiva is the Shesh Tattva, that is, he is the conscious being manifest as the associate of Paramatma. So Paramatmaika Sheshatva, we are in the Shrishti Lila. We have never been in Goloka Vrindavan, but we have the possibility by sadhu sangha to develop pure bhakti and receive a very beautiful transcendental spiritual swarup in Radha Krishna's eternal pastimes by the mercy of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and his parampara. Now, we still have some time. You can? The first. Roll the whole thing over, everything. Yeah. Because there are three, all the way over to the last one. So now, we have completed for today the discussion of the first aspect of Brahm, illusion, related to one's own identity. Now we're coming into the topic that is, we are Tetraga, the knower of the field. Now we come to the subject of Brahm, illusion, in relation to the field, what we are seeing, the world. So, this is amazing explanation given by Narad Muni. Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 7, Chapter 15, entitled Instructions for Civilized Human Beings. So you're all very civilized human beings. So these are instructions for you. So Narad Muni here will completely deconstruct bodily consciousness, and he will pinpoint, identify the essential mistake in our experience of the world, or our essential mistake in our non-experience of Paramatma everywhere. So let's look at the first verse. Abhaditopi yabaso yadhavastu taya smritaha durgatatvad aindriyakam tadvad artha vikalpitam. So the meaning is that just as a reflection is envisioned as a real independent substance, despite the fact that that is disproven logically. In the same way, the objects of this world which are perceived by the senses are only imagined to be independent realities. Now, what does that mean? For example, if someone shines a light on the wall in a shape or something, then a child may look at that. Someone who has the balya buddhi, childish intelligence, you look at that and think, oh, there's something on the wall. Actually, what he's seeing exists, but it has no independent existence from the light source. But the child is looking at the movement of the shadows or the shape on the wall and thinking, this is the reality. So, Bhagavatam is, of course, eternal. It was written down 5,000 years ago. But centuries and centuries after that, Socrates has given the same instruction to Plato. You know? It's very famous, Plato's cave analogy. that there were some persons, they were imprisoned, they were chained in a dark cave facing a wall, and behind them there was a light. And when things moved in front of that light, it cast shadows on the wall, and they were looking at this. This is all they know, and they thought these shadows are reality. Then one day, someone escaped and went outside, and they saw the real world. And he came back in and told the people in the cave, "This is not the real world. I'll take off your chains. Come with me outside. There's another world." And he said, "You're mad. You must be crazy. Leave us alone. This is the real world. We can't take off these chains. How will we stand up?" So persons who have seen the truth, they understand. Persons who have not seen the truth often think that the persons who have seen the truth are mad and persecute them. So that's why there are so many martyrs in spiritual life. Haridas Thakur was beaten in so many marketplaces. Jesus Christ was, and so many saints were martyred. So this is a very well-known example, Plato's cave. But where does this idea originate from? Srimad Bhagavatam. So it's described here. That's Hiabaso. Abhas means a reflection. Yatha vastu taya smrita. Smrita means that the person in his mind, he thinks that the reflection is the true substance. And that true substance is independent. It is existing by itself, not that it's dependent on the existence of the light source from which it's coming from. So, here he said, TATTVA, in the same way. Let's just come back, to the word abadito. Abadita means tarka viroda. It is tarka viroda, against reason. So abaditopya, even though it's against reason to think that a reflection exists independently of its source, and that this is a real substance, even though it is abadita, it is tarka virod, it is against all reason. But still, vastu taya smritaha, one who has a childish intelligence will see that which is not independent as an independent existence. Now, how does that relate to us in this world? TATTVA, in the same way, aindriyakam, the objects of the senses, the things we are perceiving around us in this world, artha vikalpitam. Vikalpitam means it is speculated or it is imagined that they are artha. That means that they are a real vastu, a valuable, independent, self-existing entity. Durgatattvad. Even though Durgatattvad, it's impossible to prove. You cannot logically establish that anything in this world is self-existent. So that's the meaning of the verse. Now, let's apply this. Now, Narad Muni is going to apply this in the next verse. Okay? What's the next verse? Chityadhi namihatanam chayana katamapihi nasangato vikaropi napritannam vitom mrisha. In the previous verse he said, Durgatattvad. You cannot logically establish that something is self-existent, an independent, individual, self-existent unit. You can't establish it logically. But we think like that all the time. That's how we think. For example, if you have whatever it is, here's a wooden book stand, right? It's just there, right? It's a vastu. Isn't it a vastu? Isn't this a real substance? Huh? Seems like. Now we do this naturally. Everyone does it without thinking. In this verse, on the second line, you see the word chaya. Chaya means, the general meaning is a shadow, but here it means a mental representation. In other words, when you see something, in your mind you have a mental representation of it as it's just there, it's just existing by itself. Where's God? There's no God. Where's the proof of God? Everything is just existing. Here it is. The table, the chair, the bottle, they're just all... So you understand? You have in your mind a chaya, that means a mental representation of every object, and they're existing by themselves. No one's doing it. But this is not a fact. Just like, let's say, if someone is playing music with a violin, you can hear the music, but when they stop playing the violin, the music disappears. So, existence is only God's music. If God were not making everything exist, it would not, at every moment, it would not exist. But we have a chaya, a mental representation in our mind that this bottle, this table, this chair, they're just independently and individually self-existent by themselves. And then people have this question, where is God? Is there a God or not? So, in the previous verse, Narad Rishi said, Durga Tattvat, because you cannot logically prove that anything is just existing by itself, independently of its components, its component elements. Therefore, this idea itself is a Brahm. It's a big mistake. It's an illusion. So now in this verse, Narad Rishi will explain why you cannot logically prove that anything exists as an independent, self-existent object. He'll explain that now. So he's saying, Chityadinam ihatanam. Atana means there are various objects in the world, and what are they made of? Chityadinam. Chitti means earth. So earth, water, fire, air, ether. We can see objects around us, and they're made of the different elements. Now, what is the relationship between the elements, the component elements of an object, and the object itself? In other words, the representation of the object that you have in your mind. You say, here's a bottle. Here's a bottle, right? It's just existing there by itself. But you know that this bottle is made of certain elements. There's some earth element in there, maybe some water, all the elements, different elements are there in an object. Now what's the relationship between the component elements and this whole thing that you are calling the bottle, which you have in your mind? That chaya, that mental representation of a whole thing. What is the relation between the whole and the component parts? Now, Narad Rishi will cut one by one every possibility. So first he said, Na sangato. You can see in the third line. Na sangato. Sangat means an aggregate. An aggregate means that the component parts are just together next to each other, but they're not related actually. Just like, have you ever seen a forest? You've seen a forest, right? Really? You have in your mind a chaya, a mental representation that there's this whole thing which is called a forest. But when you actually get there, you see that it's actually all individual trees. Right? From far away you thought it was one thing, a forest. And you have that chaya in your mind, that mental representation. But the fact of the matter is, it is actually a sangat. It's an aggregate of trees. Because you can grab one tree and pull it. And you uproot the tree and you take it somewhere, but the forest is still there. Right? So what you're calling the forest, this is a chaya, this is just a mental representation in your mind. So, Buddhists, they say that nothing is really meaningful. To see things as individual objects, this is not meaningful because everything is just a chaya. It's just an aggregate of the elements. So now, Narad Muni is speaking this in relation to our body. Consider your body. Because we've already discussed that we're not the body, we're the soul. So now this body becomes the primary ketra, the primary field. Because the soul is the knower of the field, this body. Now this body, is the body a sangat? An aggregation of elements? So Narad Muni is saying, Na sangato. No, it cannot, because if it were just an aggregate of elements, then you could just take one part of the body, just pull it. And just like you take the tree, you pull it, and the forest stays there, and the bit that you take goes over there. But if someone catches your finger and pulls, right, then your whole body will come. So it's not a sangat like a forest. It's not the body is not a sangat. So we can reject the Buddhist idea. Like a Buddhist will say, there's no such thing as a pot. It's just lots of little atoms all together in a particular arrangement, doing one function of holding water. But actually it's just a sangat. If you zoom in, it's just nothing is connected with anything else, like a forest. Okay. But in relation to our body, we cannot say that, because if you take a part of the body and you pull, then the whole thing comes. So this must be another relationship. So then Narad Muni is saying, Na sangato vikaro pi. Is the body a vikar? That means a compound of the elements. You see, let's say in chemistry, you get one element and another one, and you mix them together and they make a compound. And this compound is a new substance. It's neither this or this, but they came together and transformed and made something new. So in Nyaya, the logicians, their philosophy is called Arambavad, that the elements come together and make something new. Okay? Nacha? So, is the body, the whole, something new that comes about by the combination of elements? Or here api, vikaro api. Here api also means transformation. Or do the elements not compounding with each other but stay as they are, transform and make the body? So Narad Muni is saying, Na pratan nan mishom risha. No, this is not true. And to establish this, we have to examine what is the relationship between the parts of the body and the mental representation you have in your mind that your body is a whole thing. This is what we're challenging here. Or rather, Narad Muni is challenging. He's teaching Yudhishthira Maharaj. You are thinking, I have a body. Here it is. It's a whole thing. It's an individual, isolated object which is existing by itself. It is a self-existing object, just like this bottle or a wooden book stand is just there existing. So my body is also, it's existing by itself, and it's a whole, it's a one unit. So this mental representation we have as the body being a whole, well, what relationship does that have with the component parts, the elements? So Narad Muni says, you have to ask this question. Is this body, this whole body, one with the component elements, or is it different from the component elements? So if he says, Na pritan, no, Na-pratan means it cannot be different from its component elements. Because if you start to take away the elements of your body, you cannot separate them. Right? To take away one part, another, there's not... like a cloth. If you have a cloth, and if you ask someone, is the thread in the cloth or is the cloth in the thread? Right? Here's a piece of cloth. Is the thread in the cloth or not? If the thread is in the cloth, then you take the thread out, and the cloth will be there, you can put it back into the cloth. When you take away the thread, it's no cloth. Only in your, this is what the meaning of chaya is here. Chaya is you have a mental representation that there's this whole thing which is different from its parts. There are parts, and that whole thing is the shelter of its parts. But when you take away the thread, then there's no cloth. So you have only a mental representation of this being a whole thing that exists independently from its parts. So, na-pratan, we cannot say that the body as a whole exists independently of its component parts. It's agreed, right? All it is, it's just a collection of elements are there. Now, if the whole does not exist separately from the parts, then the whole must exist in the parts. Right? The cloth exists in the thread. But the problem with this is that if the whole exists in the parts, does it exist fully in each part, or does it exist only partially in each part? So, if this idea we have that our body is a whole independent thing exists fully in each part, then the finger would be the whole body. If you touch the finger, you would have touched the whole body. If you saw the finger, you would have seen the whole body. But it's not true. So then you think, well, we have this idea, the chaya, that the body is a one whole independent, self-existent unit, and it's existing partially in each part. But that is not also possible. Because the whole and the parts. Now the whole is whole and the parts are parts. So for the whole to exist in the parts, it will need another set of non-constituent parts to inhabit them. It's a little... Yeah, I'll say that one more time. In your mind, you have a chaya, a representative. This is my body, it's a whole thing. Right? But you know, your body is constituted of parts, earth, water, fire, air, and so on. So does this whole is not different. It must, then you're thinking now the whole exists in the parts. But the problem is this. The parts are there, and the whole is whole. So how can it exist in them? The only way that it could exist in them is that whole must have another set of parts, not the constituent ones, to exist in those parts, to pervade it. But then it raises the question, what's the relationship between the non-constituent parts and the whole? And then, is it one with it or different? Then you need another set of non-constituent parts. But then what's the relationship with those parts and the whole? You need another set. So it becomes the infinite regression. So that is called in logic vicious regress. Infinite regression. It's a little bit. You have to hear deeply and meditate on it, do vichara, then you'll understand. So here, Narad Rishi is basically saying that we've just proven that there's no such thing as the whole. The chaya of the body being a whole thing it's all impossible. So Durga, in the previous verse, Durgavatvat Aindriyakam. With objects that we see in this world and with our own body, logically we cannot establish that these are whole independent units. There are only parts there. But it's not a sangat. We've proven that it cannot be a sangat. So now we have such a difficulty. Okay, let's say that the whole is just a projection of the mind, just like we were saying, the cloth is just threads, actually, but we have an idea. So our body as a whole independent unit is just an idea. So yesterday you learned that you're not the body, and today you learn even your body is not the body. This idea that your body is a whole independent unit is just a chaya, it's vikalpitam. It's just an idea in your mind. There are a number of reasons. Krishna gives other reasons, for example, in the 11th canto also. He said that it's like looking at a flame. So you say, here's the flame. But actually the flame is thousands and thousands of reactions all going on. Very quickly, but it seems to make a consistent shape. And you say, this is the flame. But at any split second that you point to that flame, it's not the same flame. And Krishna gives another example. A person looks and says, here's the river. Where is this river you're talking about? Even the Greek philosopher Heraclitus, he was famous for saying that a man never puts his foot in the same river twice. Actually, you have water, it's raining, it's falling on the mountain, and that water's flowing. So it's every second, it's a different, let's just say there are atoms of water, it's a different atoms of water going past. Where's this river that you talk about? Where is it? It's a chaya. It's a mental representation in your mind. So the body is also like that. At every second, everything, food is going in, something's coming out, everything is changing, moving, like this. So a person never puts his foot in the same river twice. The idea of the river itself is a chaya mental representation. So you are not only not the body, but even your body in this sense is, there's no the body. Right? Because there's only a flow. There's a flow of elements. The body, what is that? The is a single thing, which has a stable existence. But here we're speaking about even the elements from which the body is made. Also, we cannot say that they're self-existent. So, in the first step, we showed how we have a mental representation in the mind of the chaya, of the body being an independent, self-existent whole. But when we looked at it closely, we found that this whole was only, that's the chaya, vikalpita, an imagination, and all you have is the parts, and those are the elements, earth, water, fire, air, ether. You just have the parts. So you agree, right? The whole was in your mind, but it's just, they're only parts. Okay. Now, the problem is this, that these parts, if you just look at one part, the part itself is a whole in relation to its parts. Digest. Would anyone like me to say that sentence one more time?
Yes.
So then, in the next verse, Narad Muni is saying that, okay, you have a chaya, an idea in your mind that this body is one whole thing. But when you examine it, you found that the whole was just in your mind. And what you actually have is just all these parts, the different earth, water, fire, air, ether. They're clubbed together. But if you look at each part itself is a whole in relation to its own parts, like earth is made of atoms. Right? According to Nyaya and Vaisheshik Darshan, it's made of atoms. According to Sankhya Darshan, the element of the earth is made of the tanmatras. You know, the tanmatras, Shabda, Sparsha, Rupa, Rasa, Gandha, combined together and make the element of earth. But in any way, you have this problem where the whole was only a chaya representation in your mind, and you decided that, but it's just parts. But when you look at the parts are whole in relation to their own parts, so that also disappears as well. So Narad Muni is saying, Nabritan Namrishab Nanbitom Mrisha. The word Mrisha means false. The idea of something being a self-independent individual existence is only a chaya. In your mind, they're only the parts, But then when you look at the parts individually, they are whole related to their parts. So that's also force. And so then the question comes is, well, what's really real? What is really real? So the answer is that the conclusion is that that which appears to be a single, we have this impression that there is a single unit, self-existent unit everywhere, is the actual Vastu, Paramatma. Self-existent units don't exist. They have parts, but those are whole in relation to their parts. And they're whole in relation to their parts. Even you get to the atom is also a creation of the mind. Avidya maya kalpitaste. In Srimad Bhakti it's also said, that is just a mental the atoms exist, it's just a mental representation. What actually exists? Paramatma. So, in Srimad Bhagavatam it is said that the Paramatma enters through his Kala Shakti, his feature as time. He enters into the material elements and transforms them to make all the forms. And so the forms are like a shadow, and the Vastu is Paramatma. So you remember, if you're looking at the world and thinking, oh, this is this person, this is this person, this is this table, this is this chair, everything, you are like the child looking at the reflection on the wall, thinking, oh, this is self-existence. And when the consciousness is purified, then you realize that the cause of all the forms and behind everything is the one Vastu, who is actually a Vastu, who is indivisible. He doesn't have, there's no whole and parts. He's indivisible, he's Akhanda, Advaya, TATTVA. And that is Paramatma everywhere. So, I'll give some little thought experiments for you just to help you assimilate it. In the Chatusloki Bhagavatam, the first verse of the Chatusloki Bhagavatam, Krishna said, Aham meva sameva gri nanyadyat sadasat param tascharaham yadetatcha yovasisye tasosnaham. Before the creation, before cause and effect was manifest, only I existed, Krishna is saying. And at the end, when the universe is dissolved, only I exist. And in the middle, only I exist. That is the first verse of the Chatusloki Bhagavatam, giving Sambandha Gyan. Okay? So, just try to picture it for a moment. Just picture this for a moment. Close your eyes for a moment. Okay, now put your sense of I, take it out of the body and mind and just keep it in yourself. Your soul. You're spiritual, you have no body, just your Atma. Now, before the creation, Krishna is saying, only I existed. So now, there's you, and there's Krishna. There's no creation. So then, see Krishna, in the form of Paramatma, enters into his potential, formless, the Prakriti is a formless potential energy. But by the influence of Kal, the time Shakti, Paramatma enters into that and causes that formless potential to transform. And so, these are all essentially forms of the Paramatma. And the Paramatma becomes the planets, becomes the earth, becomes everything in it, becomes all the people, becomes all the bodies, including everybody around you, including your own body. Paramatma has become everything. Now you as the Atma You enter into one of those bodies, and now you're claiming, this one's mine. Just like you can go to a city, you can go to a town with many tall buildings, you can walk up the stairs of one building to the top and you can look out and you see all the other buildings. So you're looking at the city from the vantage point of that one building. But you can come down from the building and go in another one and look from that vantage point. You really have no connection with any of those buildings. None of them are you or anyone else. So in the same way, Paramatma is cause and material energy to transform. All the forms are his forms. And by karma, you have entered into one of those forms and you're looking from the perspective of that form. But the form is his. The form is his, not yours. He is the primary owner of this form. And you are just there for a moment, viewing the world from the perspective of that form. But the form is his form. Okay, you open your eyes now. So now, what you're seeing is what I just told you about. Right? That was not a thought experiment or anything like that. That was what you're seeing right now. Understand? So, Sri Krishna said in Bhagavad Gita that Bahunam Janmanam Ante Jnanavam Mam Prapadyate Vasudeva Sarvamiti Sa Mahatma Sudurlabha. After many births and deaths, when a person actually gets jnana, knowledge, he's not a Buddha, he's not Brahm in illusion anymore, then he surrenders to me. And what is the knowledge that he got? Vasudeva Sarvamiti. There is Kshetragya, the knower, the soul, and there is the field. But this field, everything is only the forms of Vasudeva Sarvamiti. So, not everyone will get it. Sa Mahatma Sudurlabha. Such a great soul is very, very rare. But, okay, so we are completing our discussion of the subject of what it means to be in Brahm, in illusion related to the self and to the world. Having heard this knowledge, one should try to live in accordance with that. And gradually, by practicing sadhana, hearing from Guru, serving, chanting the holy name, Janatyashu Vairagyam Jnanam Chaya Dahoy to come. This knowledge, it will manifest by itself as a result of bhakti. And Narad Muni and other rishis are describing it in Srimad Bhagavatam to confirm and to for the dridata of your bhakti. So if you're following bhakti and you're starting to see the world in a very different way, then you're not going mad. It's like when Chaitanya Mahaprabhu came back from Gaya, you see, he's gone mad. But when bhakti is manifesting and along with that divine knowledge, you are not going mad. So Narad Muni is explaining in detail what this knowledge is in Srimad Bhagavatam. So you can. This is opening the door to many different tattvas. Let me see what time. If we have time, I'll discuss one more tattva. Okay, one more small tattva. Is everyone? Are you all on the same page? Did you follow so far? Yeah. Some of you are sweating. So when you, I hope that when you open your eyes, actually your eyes really open. Om Jnana Timarandasya Jnana Salakaya Chakshur Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. So you can roll it over to the last verse then. So then Narad Muni, he's saying, Satsa Drishya Brahmastavad Vikalpe Sati Vastuna Jagratswa Apoyata Sopnetata Vidin Nishedata. Narad Muni is anticipating a question. So, the question he's anticipating is this. You have just said, Yudhishthira, when you say to him, Oh Narad, You have just said that all the forms around me, they're all Paramatma's forms. But we see that one form is a Brahmin, one is a Kshatriya, and so on. And Brahmanas and Kshatriyas, they have some vidhi and nishedh, rules and regulations they have to follow in their life. If they follow them, then they get pious results. And if they don't follow them, if they transgress vidhi nishedh, rules and regulations, prohibitions, then they get impious results. But if these forms that we are seeing everywhere are forms of Paramatma, how can God, who is beyond duality, be subject to vidhi nishedh, the rules and regulations of the material existence and their reactions? Right? Does everyone? I'm about to give the answer, but you have to understand the question first. Did everyone understand the question? Huh? I'll just say it one more time. If in the previous verses we have learned that all the forms around us, the bodies of every living being, are actually the Paramatma's bodies. But we see one person has the form of a Kshatriya, one a warrior, one's a Brahmin, one is a Vaishya, and so on, Brahmachari, Sannyasis. So in Varnashram Dharma, there is vidhi and nishedh, some rules and prohibitions that have to be observed. So if you follow the rules, you get piety. If you transgress the rules, you get impiety and the reactions come, good or bad. So if the forms are Paramatma's forms, how can God, who is Advaya, non-dual and transcendental, be subjected to the dualities of vidya and nishedh? How can Paramatma be under rules and regulations of this world? Just like as people say that, Krishna, I can worship Lord Ram, he's very well behaved, but not Krishna. Krishna's behavior is not good. How can he dance with other people's wives in the middle of the night? Yeah. But they're not understanding this fact that God is beyond duality. He is not subject to the vidya and nishedh of this world. So the morality related to this world, it does not apply to God. But now you're saying that all these forms are Paramatma's forms, so how can vidya and nishedh be applied to the Paramatma? So Narad Muni is giving the answer here. So he's saying, Syatsa drisha brahmastavat vikalpe sati vastunaha jagrat swapo yata swapne tata vidhi nishedataha. He said that as long as the soul which is in that body has Sadrisha Brahm. Sadrisha. Sadrisha means seeing something as one, what we have discussed, that chaya, having a mental representation of one individual form. There's actually a technical word for it in Sanskrit. It is called Aikya Buddhi. Buddhi means consciousness, awareness, Aikya, that this is one individual object. Really, as we discussed, it's like the river, or it's like a flame, but we have Aikya Buddhi. This is one self-existent object. So that's called Aikya Buddhi. So, and also, when you have that Aikya Buddhi, then this is one, another individual, self-existent unit, then you are thinking, it is called Swatantra Satayaha. Swatantra Satayaha, that there is a multiplicity of self-existent forms. This form is existing by itself, this form is existing, there's not a multiplicity. There's only one, Paramatma. There's one material energy. The Paramatma enters and causes it to transform. So what seems to be a multiplicity of self-existent forms is only one form, the Paramatma, causing the manifestation of apparently many forms, self-existent forms in the material energy. So that's called Swatantra Sataya. We see like that. So when a person has the dristi, the vision that everything is individual self-existent forms. That is called Sadrishya Brahm. So Tavat means as long as. As long as the Jiva in this body has this Sadrishya Brahm, seeing the self-existent individual forms. So Tantra Satta. As long as that's Vikalpa Sati Vastuna. By Vikalpa, he thinks that they are the Vastu, the truth. Then, the Tata Vidi Nishedata, for that amount of time, the rules and regulations are applicable to that body. Understand? So, as long as you have this Sadrishya Brahm, not seeing the Paramatma everywhere, rules and regulations, though this body is one form of Paramatma, but the rules and regulations are applicable to that body, for that individual. Though Paramatma himself is never in the duality. So, how Paramatma is not in the duality, but the person who is, the Paramatma is accompanying, is in duality, is explained in the third line. Jagrat swapo yatha swapne. It means, swapne means in a dream. Right? So in a dream, Jagrat swapo, there is wakefulness and dreaming. Now, what does that mean? It means this. Imagine that you're having a dream. But in your dream, you dream sometimes that you're awake and sometimes you dream that you're asleep. Understand? So you're just having a dream. But in that dream, you dreamt that you were walking around, then you dreamt that you took rest, and then you dreamt that you woke up. But that was all a dream. So you're lying on your bed, but in your dream you think you're somewhere else. In that somewhere else, you're sometimes sleeping and sometimes awake. Right? Now, the Paramatma sees it like another person would be seeing you. The Paramatma says, oh, he's dreaming. But you are thinking, I'm awake, sometimes awake and sometimes asleep. So for you there's duality, but there's not duality for him. For the Paramatma, Paramatma, let's say if you see someone sleeping, you're just saying, he's just sleeping. So that's one thing. But for the person who's sleeping, he's thinking, sometimes I'm awake and sometimes I'm asleep. You see? So for him there's duality. So in the same way, for the Paramatma, there's no duality. But for the conditioned soul who has Sadrishya Brahm, the vision of individual self-independent units, as long as he has that vision, he is in duality, and the rules, Vidi Nished, the rules and regulations of Shastra apply to him. Now what would happen if that soul became free from Sadrishya Brahm? Krishna said in Bhagavad Gita, Yo mam pasyati sarvatra sarvam chamai pasyati tasyaham na pranasyami satanema pranasyati. For one who sees me everywhere and sees everything in me, I am never lost to him and he is never lost to me. So what if a person becomes like that? Free from Sadrishya Brahm. Now that person is no longer subject to Vidi Nisheda. So Jagrat Swapo Yata Swapne Tata Vidi Nishedataha. A person who is free from the duality, free from Brahm related to himself, and Sadrishya Brahm related to the body and to the other objects of the world, he is also no longer subject to Vidhi and Nished, rules and regulations. So, therefore he said, Atmaramas Chamunayo Nigranta. What does Nigranta mean? Free from the knot of ego, that's one meaning. And? Free from the grantas, which are the rules. Yes, exactly. Rasik Shekhar. Grantha means the scriptures are called granthas. Right? Scriptures are called grantha. So, when one becomes free from this Brahm, then he becomes Atmaramaschamunyonya grantha. He's not bound by the rules and regulations of the scripture. So let's take it in this way. The body is whose body? It is Paramatma's form. But the Paramatma will conduct this body in such a way that it is subject to rules and regulations as long as the soul there, Satsa Drishya Brahmas Tavad, as long as that soul has the Sadrishya Brahm, the perception of self-independent units everywhere. Yeah? Now, if that person becomes free from Sadrishya Brahm, becomes free from illusion, now that body, which is one form of the Paramatma, no longer acts, or rather, no longer permits that soul to act, all controlled by the Vidya and Nishad. Now Paramatma himself, is that body is not acting like a conditioned soul anymore. Now that soul, that body, is a direct manifestation in this world of Paramatma. Jive sakshat nahi tati guru checha rupe shiksha guru hoy Krishna mahanta swarupe. So Krishna said, though the conditioned soul cannot see the Paramatma in his heart, therefore to help him, he comes outside in the form of Shri Guru. Naivopayatcha patitim kavayastavesha Brahmayusha vikutaveta mudasparantam antabahistanubitam ashubham vidunyam acharya chaita vapasa swagatim vyanakti. Uddhavji, he said, "Oh Krishna, the great transcendental poets, they cannot express the extent of their gratitude to you, even if they glorify you for the life of Lord Brahma for millions of years. Why? Because you are so kind that you appear in two forms. Anta bahistanu britam vidungan acharya checha vapusa. You appear in two forms to guide them over all obstacles, internally and externally. Internally, as the Antaryami Paramatma, and externally as the Acharya. Acharya mam vijaniyam navasuyeta kaichit namatya buddha suyeta sarva deva mayo guru. Krishna said, I am the Acharya. So in this way, because the absolute truth is absolute, when you realize one aspect of Tattva, all the other Tattvas begin to manifest. So by understanding the nature of Brahm, the removal of Brahm in regard to the self and in regard to the world, then one realizes the presence of Paramatma everywhere, and one is no longer under the control of the Vidhi and Nishad. General persons, the body is subject to Vidya and Nishad, but one who is become enlightened is no longer. And so he becomes the external manifestation of the Paramatma in your heart. That is Sri Guru or pure Vaishnavas. So in this way, Narad Rishi is describing in a beautiful way a complete deconstruction of the bodily conception of life, and also it lays the ground for the true understanding of Guru Tattva. Grantaraj Bhagavatam. It may seem as if you're going mad, but it's actually everyone else is mad. Only the devotees are sane. So try to don't slip into your old stereotyped conditioned ways of thinking. Tatsrinvan supatham vicharna paro bhaktya vimuchendra Srimad Bhagavatam Puranam Amalam Yad Vaishnavanam Priyam Yasmin Paramansam Eka Paramam Jnanam Param Giyate Tatra Jnana Viraga Bhakti Sahitam Naiskanyam Aviskritam Tatsrinvan Supatam Vitarna Paro Bhaktya Vimuchendra. Srimad Bhagavatam is the perfect, immaculate Purana. It is very, very dear to the Vaishnavas. It contains the Gyan, the knowledge, which is of the Paramahamsas. And one should hear it, repeat it, and that means Tatsrinvan Supatan, repeat it, Vicharanam, and one should deliberate upon it and assimilate it, that it becomes, you see, through the eyes of Srimad Bhagavatam. Then what will happen? Tatsrinvan Supatam Vicharana Paro Bhaktya Vimuchendra. Then Bhakti will come and you will be liberated from this material existence and go to Goloka Vrindavan. Krishna Govinda Govinda Gopala Nandala Govinda Govinda Gopala Nandala Krishna Govinda Govinda Gopala Nandala Govinda, 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 Krishna Govinda, 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 Gopala Nandala, Krishna Govinda, Govinda, Gopala Bhakti Pradhan Yesu Goswami Raj ki jai, Krishna Sota Bardar Guru Prabhat ki jai, Jai Satpa Shri Bind ki jai, Mahabhagavad Shokshara Swari Raj ki jai, Saptam Goswami Shatantar Bhaktinod ki jai, Swami Upanu Guru Guru ki jai, Praise goes Krishna Chaitanya Pavanitana, Sri Radha Shri Gaur Bhaktavind ki jai, Shri Bhagavan Ketamanu Bhagavan ki jai, Shri Bhagavan Krishna Nam Sankirtan ki jai, Shri Bhagavan Govinda Maran Mohan ki jai, Shri Vishnu ki jai, Swagar Bhaktavind ki Mareswar Susprisha Mana Dini Smatra ki jai, Jai Gaur Premanandi.